Good afternoon. This is the interview number 2 of an life oral history of Roy Schilling. We're here at the Illinois Information Service on September 24th, 2007. My name is Chris Reynolds. I'm a volunteer at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum, and we'd kind of like to start out with some follow-up questions from our first interview. And one of the areas that Roy was interested in talking some more about is Elkhart history. So why don't I just let you kind of tell us what you want to tell us about that.
Well, Chris, I've been going back and reviewing some of the history of Elkhart, and I found it very interesting to me that Illinois became a state in 1818. In 1818, a man named James Chapman, married to a woman named Latham, and with her brother, came up and settled and spent the winter on the Sangamon River near Springfield. They went on up to Elkhart in the springtime, and they found the Elkhart Hill, which is 770 feet above elevation and is wooded, 600 acres of woodland. They were very excited about it, so they went back to Kentucky to tell their father. And he came up right away in April of 1819 and staked out a claim on the northwest side of the hill. He also at that time built a small cabin, planted 30 acres of corn, went back to Kentucky with the children, and brought back his entire family of 10 children. And they spent the summer doing that. It was quite a big journey, you know. They had a lot of wagons. They finally got settled in September on the hill of September 1819, the first white settlement in Logan County. And as I understand, it's about the first white settlement that far north in Illinois. So and from that, the town began to grow.
Right.
Very slowly.
What are there other founding fathers that you want to talk
well,
about?
Yes.
Or?
The Latham family stayed. They stayed there and were very active. I want to show you some pictures pretty soon, if I can, of the two boys. They became very famous men, Richard and Robert. They stayed there until 1853. Very active. Became very good friends of Abraham Lincoln and Governor Oglesby. And if I should show you, I'd like to show the picture of these friends. This is I don't have a picture of James, but this is the picture of Robert. Very distinguished man. And and his brother, Robert, which is the youngest, I think I got it here. Oh, that's Richard. And then what they did about a few years ago, up on the hill, and I took you up there the other day, where Wayne Henner lives, they found the site of the cabin, and an archaeologist came up from somewhere, and he dug down 4 feet, and he found all the artifacts there, silverware and china and all.
Are those that are, you can see those in the museum in downtown Elkhart, right?
Yes, they're all in the Museum of Elkhart. So that land was owned by Latham until 1853, and then I think they sold it to a man named Thompson. Well, first of all, they sold it to Shockey, if I remember. John Shockey came from Pennsylvania, and then he owned the land for some time, and he sold it to a man named Thompson, and Thompson sold the land on the hill to the Oglesby family in 1888. John Shockey was the founder of Elkhart in 1855. They laid the town out for the first time.
And they incorporated with the state of Illinois.
And they began building homes and churches. We have the St. Patrick's Catholic Church. I have the exact dates, but I don't think that's too important. St. Patrick's Catholic Church, the Methodist Church, and the Disciples of Christ Christian Church. They're still very active.
Some of the original businesses that started in Elkhart? Or?
Of course, I can't go back to 1819 or anything like that, but when I grew up in the 1920s, we had a very thriving community. We had the Taylor's General Store, which sold about everything you wanted to buy. We had the Stahl's Hardware Store. We had a Ford agency run by Johnny Oglesby, who is no relation to the family. We had 2 doctors, Dr. Gwen Taylor, who delivered my twin brother and me, and Dr. Hunter. We had, say, the Stall Hardware store. But to have two doctors in town was very good. In 1901, the public library was built by one of the Gillette girls, Miss Jessie Gillette, and we have a very fine library.
It's a very impressive building, as I recall.
Yes,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Schools? Had your own schools there?
Well, the first
Up
school,
until when?
I think the first school, the elementary school, yes. The first school of elementary was built about 1865, just across the road from the main part of town in what was the original John Gillette family. And it was there until 1923. I went to school in my first 2 years in that old building. It had 2 rooms downstairs for first, second grade, third, fourth, fifth, and upstairs we had seventh and eighth. In 1923, they were able to build a new building of 4 classrooms. And very sadly, that building has been in existence and operating ever since 1923 until this year. They closed it down in June. There is no elementary school in Elkhart. The high school was formed in 1920. The classes first met in the town hall and the library, and it had no building. But and the first graduating class was 1922, a small class. Then in 1924, we built a beautiful high school on the west side of town. And that high school operated from 1924 until 1974, and they closed it, unfortunately. And that's the school from which I graduated. We had excellent teachers. I went back to check on some of them. We had, during that 50-year period, we had 8 different principals. W.W. Ritchie served as principal for 33 years, from 1938 to 1965. So
Long
we have
period.
five members. So they tore the building down, as they do, and made a park.
A consolidation with another school district at some point?
Both schools are now with Mount Pulaski.
Yeah. Was that a painful decision for the community? Was there a referendum that
They just, school board decided to do it, I guess.
just decided to?
See, the schools, back in up until about 45 or 6, we had a lot of rural schools. So they consolidated the rural schools, and they all came into Elkhart Grade School.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, we don't have any schools. We have no stores. We have really no business. It's still pretty active, but not much going on.
Couple good restaurants there.
Yes, yeah.
Couple good restaurants there. Anything else you'd like to say about Elkhart before we move on?
Well, let's see. I can refer to my notes here. I don't know. Well, let's see. I mentioned the churches and the business.
We'll probably get back to Elkhart when we talk about Oglesby.
I think when I think about, I don't wish to brag about anything, but we had some very fine students. I'd like to mention only one.
Sure.
Well, Joseph Lannerman was one. He was a year older than I, but he became a very large businessman. He became the he became the president and CEO of the Amstack Corporation of Chicago, and he was a good friend of mine. We had one who was a doctor. We had a lot of them who were teachers. Most of them were farmers.
Right. You spoke of the Hickey family, I think, before.
Yes.
Are they from Elkhart originally?
Well, another thing I thought I might mention is the diversity of the population, which is very interesting for a small community.
Mm-hmm.
The largest number of residents were Irish immigrants, farmers. The Fitzgibbons, the Fitzgeralds, the Murphys, the Turneys, Walshes, all kinds of them. We had three Swedish families, the Olsons, the Johnsons, and the Everstons, and the Larsons. And that was the 3 of them, the 4 of them. We also were very fortunate, I've always felt very fortunate that we were able to have black families. We had about 5 or 6 black families. 2 of them, Mr. John Bruner and Mr. Kibbe, were farmers, and they had children. Mr. Bruner lived across the field from us, across the road from us, west of Elkhart, and was an excellent neighbor. Mm-hmm. I tell an interesting little story. When my father died, he was killed in 1951, burned to death. Mr. Bruner came to the house, And he was an old gentleman, white-haired, and he kept saying, Mr. Schilling, just saying neighbors in life and neighbors in death. He kept saying that. I said, Mr. Bruner, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, oh, you do too. He said, you know, when you were little tots, you lived up there on the hill across from us. And he said, now, my daughter, Ollie Reen, my wife are buried up there in the cemetery, and your brother's married right beside, so we're going to be neighbors in death. And, you know, that's very comforting, very comforting. Right. We had the Wilry family. We had.
So are there some African-American people buried at the cemetery up there?
Oh, yes.
In Elkhart?
Oh, yes. Cook family, Allison's. And there were, I think we've had 7 or 8. Well, it was Allison's, Cooks, and Hammonds, Kings, Kibbies, and Woolries, and Bruners.
Yeah.
I think today, I was going to call my brother. I don't think we have any. We might have one family left.
Right, right.
And they were descendants of the first family.
Right.
I think that pretty well covers.
Well, let's talk about, I know one of the subjects that we talked about in our last interview was your long career with the Decatur Public Schools.
Yes.
And we touched on sort of the decline of the school system there in Decatur during the years that you were there. And we talked a little bit about race relations in Decatur. I'm kind of interested in your views on again, kind of why the school system declined, whether it could have been avoided maybe in some way, and maybe some things that we've learned from that. You learned from that as a principal. You were a principal and a teacher, of course, a former teacher. You were a university professor who was teaching other teachers. I'm kind of interested in your perspective on that.
Well, let's see, I went there in 1949 as principal of the E.A. Gassman School, which was right downtown, and it was, I felt very fortunate because, as I said, E.A. Gassman was the first student to be enrolled at Illinois State Normal University in 1957, and he came down, and he never did go anyplace else. He graduated in 1861, came to Decatur, and was our superintendent for 47 years. When I arrived in Decatur, it was a big changeover. You see, up until about that time, when a teacher was employed, the school board or the superintendent told you what your salary was, and that was it. But they began to get what they called, I don't like the word, but union. We call it the Decatur Education Association. And they wanted some change, and they made big changes. We had summer schools.
We're talking about the 50s for the most part when that
In the
occurred?
early 50s, we had school year-round. Well, not for everybody, but the teacher wanted to do 12 months a year. They got off 1 year to go to summer school, but they worked in summer school. From 1952, when I went in as assistant superintendent, administrative assistant in elementary, we built from 1952 to 1960, we built 17 new elementary schools and 2 new high schools. In 1959, we lost a referendum, which we had to reduce the staff. At that time, I was one of 5 reassigned to different positions, and I went out to Brush College School. Now, people say, what's Brush College? Well, it was an elementary school. It was part of Lakeview High School. In 1959, we didn't only lose the referendum, we also annexed Lakeview High School, or Lakeview School District. We had a high school and about 4 elementary schools: Excelsior, El Dorado, Brush College 1, Brush College 2, which later became Spencer School.
Some of the surrounding areas to Decatur.
And the school enrollment went from around 11,000 to almost 23,000 in 1969. Teachers were hard to find, good teachers, and so I remember at Dennis School when I was there from 1964 to 71, I had to have 2 classrooms with 2 teachers, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. We also made history because in 1953, the first black teacher was employed. Lizzie Johnson came to us from Champaign-Urbana, a wonderful, wonderful woman. She became a principal and was one of my closest friends. Then in 1969, we integrated, and that's the beginning.
Now, did this gradually happen with housing patterns, or was
Well,
there some sort of
Well,
integration lawsuit?
In 1969, 1964, Fairview Avenue, Millikan University and Main Street is Fairview Avenue, and there was not a black family west of Fairview except one. The Reverend Clendenin, a minister, was the one. But housing, you see, with integration, housing became open and people moved. And
so federal law probably influenced it more than anything
very
else.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And so things began changing, and it's been gradual, but some good and some bad. They made some, I don't like to criticize, they made some bad mistakes.
Yeah.
Sometimes they changed where the schools were going to go, and then it began busing.
On mistakes in terms of boundaries of schools, or what kind of mistakes?
Well, they had moved, like they would change the arrangement from junior high to what they call middle school.
Oh, you mean in terms of how they arranged the schools?
Well, one year they took from Dennis School where I was, I had only kindergarten, fourth grade, and then they brought them back. See, they moved around a lot.
Yeah.
And
it's typical for many
and people
schools.
didn't like that. And then they began busing. Another thing we began doing.
What prompted the busing? Do you remember?
Well, they were trying to integrate, and to integrate.
So you were doing that.
You had to take children from different parts of town.
Okay.
The other thing in elementary school, the high school, we only had one high school until 1958. In 1958, we opened up Eisenhower and MacArthur, and they had a lunch program. Elementary schools had no lunch program, but they began lunch programs, and that was a big change, and that was helpful.
Yeah.
You asked about the changes. Of course, I've been retired almost 29 years, so, and I have kept in touch. I've kept in touch with the family and the superintendents. A year ago, a very wonderful black lady named Gloria Davis was hired from Dodgeville, Kansas. The newspaper said we're going to get a sheriff from Dodgeville. So she came to town, and she is full of life, and she began talking to the public. She made contact with all the service clubs and churches, and she said, to get this school moving, we have to involve the family, the community. So I kept thinking, well, now, it's a good idea, but what's going to happen? It has happened.
Have they passed some referendums in recent years?
It took several years before we could get a referendum to do anything, but we finally made it. But anyway, I called and very nice, one of the, I'm always very happy when my students do well. And I had a little black girl at Southeast School, and she's an assistant superintendent. So I called her last Saturday and said, Marla, can you tell me what changes have been taking place? And she studied. She said, well, I can give you some of them. So anyway, they have, Mrs. Davis said, you've got to hold them to high standards. So what they've done, they have created more advanced classes, for science and math particularly. They have increased the graduation requirements. They could graduate. What they were doing, they were trying to, you might say, water down the curriculum so people could pass. That's no more. That's no more. They have teaching assistants in all grades, kindergarten and one, which is a big help. I keep thinking how I'd love to have had some help when I was in Lincoln teaching 44 children and no help. The test scores, fortunately, are improving, which is a big help. The dropout problem has been decreased.
Sounds like they're making
they
a
got
lot of
of help.
progress.
And the big thing is the increase in communication and involvement of the community.
So that community involvement really maybe was the key issue that they that they lacked before
it's
that they
been,
now
it's been a big help.
that they now
It's been
have.
a big help. It
Do you
really
have a
has.
sense that race relations in Decatur has improved, because we're all familiar with the
Well,
incidents that have happened that have brought Jesse Jackson to town? And,
Oh, don't talk about that.
well,
He came to town in 1999. What happened, they had a big fight at a football game, and there were some black boys involved, and they were expelled. And that's what I set up.
I believe that fight was on film because we all saw it hundreds of times.
I was in Mexico City at that time for Thanksgiving, and it was just the papers full of down in Mexico City. But it's unfortunate. Well, they got the boys back in school, and Jesse Jackson did come. But it was an unfortunate circumstance. But things have calmed down. One thing I think is because they're keeping these boys in school, all of them. You know, big difference.
Yeah, yeah. Now I know over the years, because you were attached to many educational type organizations, that you probably had some impact on educational legislation. Can you talk about that a little bit? The
Yes.
things that you were involved with over the years?
Yes. I can't tell you how many trips I made to the State House. I've had conferences with Governor Kerner. I knew personally some of the legislators, and I remember I had a conference with Governor Kerner with a committee asking if we could have an appointed superintendent of schools rather than an elected superintendent. And
do you recall what year you requested that or made that known as an issue that you were interested in?
I'm not quite sure, but I can remember.
How many years before it actually happened?
Well, it was during Governor Kerner's.
Okay.
So when
Yeah.
there were about 5 of us who met in the governor's office the day after Christmas. And one of the men from Illinois Education Association was trying to put words into Governor Kerner's mouth. And he said, I said this, damn it, this is it. He was for it.
Yeah.
But he didn't want to be told how to do it. I'll never forget. What I did, I made notes and I kept a seating chart of who was there.
Can you remember who was there?
Not really.
Okay.
It's been too long ago.
Okay.
I did it. Mm.
Governor and his staff and several.
No, just the governor himself.
Just the governor himself.
The rest
Was
of
it at the mansion or the Capitol?
It was in his office.
Oh, okay. At the Capitol, you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And the other folks were from the Illinois Education Association.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Any other pieces of legislation you can remember
Well,
lobbying
yes.
for?
We had a study with a number of school districts in the state, and we spent many years working at changing the kindergarten admission age. See, at that time, children could be admitted up to December the 1st, and we didn't think that was too good. So through the University of Illinois Department of Education with Dr. Fred Barnes, Rockford, Peoria, Kankakee, and Decatur worked several years trying to get that legislation changed. We did not succeed.
No.
But now, I believe the kindergarten entrance age is September, which is a big improvement.
Right.
Children need to be given time to develop.
Mm.
Of course, the nice thing now they have preschool education in a lot of schools. Another reason for the decrease in population, other than integration, many private schools, parochial schools, and private schools, big help.
Charter schools.
And they're all good.
Yeah.
They're all
right,
good.
Right.
Doesn't
Lots
hurt.
even lots of choices within the public
Yes,
system.
yes, that's right.
Which is good. Anything else in the educational legislation area you can think of, or?
I became, I think I mentioned to you, I was when I went into the public school office, Miss Charlotte Meyer was the assistant superintendent, and I served as her assistant in working with her. And I was given the opportunity to select a teacher education association of some kind to attend annual conferences. So she was doing she was going to conference for the Association with Supervision Curriculum Development, and she suggested that I become involved in the Association for Childhood Education International, which is a wonderful, wonderful company. So I became very active in that and served, went to conferences for about 18 years in Washington, Miami Beach, and Portland, Los Angeles, New Orleans. And through that, I met many of the great educators of the nation and became acquainted with them. And we worked on legislation. In fact,
at the national level.
Yes, in 1962, we had what we called state chairman, legislation chairman, and in 1962 I went to Omaha and was trying to build interest in legislation. And as a result, that next August, we had a workshop in Washington with 36 state chairmen present, and we had lots of...
Remember whose presidential administration that was? You said 60...
62.
So it would have been John Kennedy.
Yes, it
yeah.
was. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
do you recall any of the national leadership at that point?
You bet
or?
I do. I can name a lot of them, but the one I would like to mention is Dr. Helen Heffernan, who was the assistant, she was the chief of the Bureau of Elementary Education in the state of California. And she was not an officer of our state, of our association, but she came every year to the meeting. And in 1962 in Indianapolis, I was elected as Secretary-Treasurer of the association, serving 2 terms. In 1963, we went to Miami Beach, Florida, and in 1964, we went to Portland, Oregon, and Dr. Heffernan was there. She wasn't invited, but she just came. She was a very large woman, and she said one thing. She said, "I think the arts and the elementary education Decatur in the United States are being neglected. So here's a check for $10,000. I want you to do something about it." So I came back home and felt obligated to do something. And as a result, we had the first art show at Dennis School and Public Schools of Decatur. And I take great pride in that.
Is that continued to this day?
Well, in fact, we had our first art show a year before the Decatur Area Arts Council was founded. But the Decatur Area Arts Council is a very prominent organization now. Mm-hmm. But she was, Dr. Heffernan, too, was the kind of person. She came to Decatur and spoke to about 300 people one time for us. After World War II, Japan needed they needed a new educational program, and so the only one that they would accept would be Dr. Heffernan. The State Department, the United States State Department, sent Dr. Heffernan to Japan, and she spent 18 months with General MacArthur in his headquarters, and built it. So having that kind of experience, she'd been in California for 39 years.
She's a superintendent at schools in California?
Assistant superintendent.
Assistant superintendent.
She was from the she was from East. They had so much respect for her that they set aside, you see, the redwood forests need attention. They set aside 30 acres of land and raised money for preservation of that in memory of Dr. Heffernan. Yeah, I met a lot of them. I could name a lot more of them. I think I mentioned Dr. Goodlad. I met Dr. Goodlad when I was principal of the school in River Forest, and he and another one of my fellow principals was Dr. Bob Anderson. They both went to Harvard, and Dr. Goodlad is still very active in the University of Washington.
Well, you think we've covered the educational area?
I hope so.
Okay. It's quite a career you've had. Let's talk about, since you have been retired for almost 30 years now, as I think I heard you say, let's talk about your life since you've been retired. Travel, your involvement with churches, maybe civic organizations. I know you've done a lot.
I during the time I was in public school, I was very active. I was the legislation chairman for the PTA, the local and the regional. No, I retired on June 22nd, 1979, after 44 years, at age 65. See, I started teaching at age 21 and quit at 65. And someone said, "Why?" I said, "Well, it just felt like it should be doing." I could have stayed on. Interesting enough, laws are funny. You see, there was a law, well, maybe I shouldn't tell this story, but it's interesting. My predecessor at the Gassman School in Decatur had been there 32 years, and she was a wonderful teacher, wonderful principal. But you know, like so many people, when you get old, things change. So the school board wanted to dismiss her, and she wasn't ready to quit. So they passed a resolution in the spring of 1949 which said all school employees reaching age 65 before July the 1st are done. And that's how Miss McMillan left her job, and that's how I was employed. She didn't
You think
like.
it's a bad rule?
She didn't like me.
Yeah.
I think it's a terrible rule.
Yeah.
Because in 1979, when I retired, the federal government changed that, so I could have stayed on.
Really?
But I didn't want to.
The federal government passed a law that didn't allow local school districts to require
No,
an age.
you cannot fire a person, dismiss a person
Okay.
who's reached
It
65.
would be
on,
age
on
discrimination.
Age, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Wow.
So anyway, I had traveled some. Mrs. Schilling didn't like to travel, and she said, "You go ahead, I don't mind." So in 1975, I went to Germany and Austria, and then in 1976, I spent 2 weeks in England, Scotland, and Ireland, which is wonderful. But at retirement age, Mrs. Schilling wasn't really well, so I didn't want to go away and leave. So
Had your wife already retired from being a nurse at
yeah,
this point?
she retired. Yes, she was 17 years at the Decatur Memorial Hospital. So I got tired of going to bazaars and yard sales and all that kind of stuff. So there was an opening in our church, Central Christian Church in Decatur, for a financial secretary. And I said to my wife, I think I'd like to take that job if I can get it. And she said, well, if you want to, that's okay. She was always very supportive, never complained about what I was doing. Always very. So I called the minister and got an interview. Dr. C. William Nichols, who was a great doctor, a great minister. And he said, well, why do you want to work? He said, you're retired. I said, I like figures and I like people. He said, how long do you want this job for? I said, well, at least a year. I stayed 14 years and 9 months. I retired on January 1st, 1995.
Second career.
And it was wonderful. We had 4 ministers and 4 custodians and a nursery school, and my job was to keep the financial records. I had no authority to write a check. I did not make church deposits. I just kept the records.
Yeah. How about involvement with political or civic organizations there
well,
in Decatur?
in the meantime, the only reason I could stay 14 years and 9 months in my position as financial secretary, I had a little boy in kindergarten named John Baird, who was very good on computers. So when he'd bring his little girls to choir practice, he'd come in and help me. So he taught me everything I knew about the computers. And one year, when we got on full line, he came in, and from January to March, I kept a record of his record. He spent 105 hours in my office, and we're still very, very close friends.
All volunteer?
Yeah, all volunteer.
Yeah.
So having that experience.
And yours was a paid position, right?
Pardon?
Yours was a paid position, right? Not very much, but.
When I went, the most I could get, I did get Social Security from working at Millikan University in addition to my teacher retirement.
Yeah.
So the most I could get in 1980 was $5,000. So I worked for $5,000.
Because of the restrictions on Social
Because
Security.
if I worked over, Social Security charged me. I worked hard and was very devoted to my job. When I left, my salary was $18,000. But the wonderful thing about being in church, I got to meet the people, and I got to work with wonderful people. Dr. C. William Nichols, who is going to be 80 years old, October the 2nd, is very, very ill. He was our minister for 19 years. He went to Washington to become the minister of the National City Christian Church. He also became the president and general minister of our disciples with headquarters in Indianapolis.
How many hours a week did you work on that job? Were you full-time, 40 hours?
I worked 8
or?
o'clock to 5,
You
5
worked
days a
40
week.
hours,
And
okay.
sometimes all weekend.
Yeah.
What happened, and the reason I left, well, actually, they asked me to leave.
A second retirement.
Well, we were having difficulty. We had a change of ministers, and like a lot of churches, when you change ministers, people leave, and our membership went down, and we were having some financial problems. So they thought the best thing to do is change it. So what they really did, the position I held was never refilled. See, with working with computers, it would take me all the months of December, January, to figure out the reports for the taxes, and then I'd have to type 3 to a page the W-2 forms, and when I retired, I could do that on January 2nd.
When did you get involved with the Decatur or Macon County Historical
Oh.
Society? And
The-
how did you get involved? Did you just
The Macon County Historical Society was organized in 1916 or 17, something like, and it lay dormant until about 1969. Teachers, bless the teachers. A couple of teachers said we ought to do something about this, so we reactivated, and so I became a very active member of the Historical Society, Macon County Historical Society, in 1971, and I'm still active. We bought a church out just north of the airport, and opened up a museum, which wasn't very good. And then later in 1979, when we took in the Lakeview High School, Lakeview School District, we didn't need some of those elementary schools, so we bought, or was given for a small price from the Decatur School District, El Dorado School, and that is our museum today. It was dedicated.
That's out by the airport also, isn't it?
It was dedicated, yes. It was dedicated July the 6th, 1979. At that time, I was president of the association, and worked hard. We had lots of help, and we do have a beautiful museum complex. Just yesterday...
Were you involved in the moving of that log cabin which Abraham Lincoln
Yes,
was practiced law in?
Oh, gosh. Yes, I was. And we moved we had that, and it's been kept up. We also moved a schoolhouse. We have a caboose. We have a print shop. We have a blacksmith shop.
So I kind of call it Prairie Village, I believe it's referred to. How many places was that log cabin that
Well, it was down in the center, right, I think I showed it to you downtown. It was right down on the square in 1830 when Abraham Lincoln came to Decatur. They moved it out into Fairview Park and was there they might have moved it someplace before that, but I remember it as being in Fairview Park, just nothing in it. And then I don't remember the exact...
It was open to the public or whatever?
Yeah, well, actually they used it as a polling place for voting.
Really?
Yeah, I voted in.
All along they knew that this was the cabin that he had practiced law in.
So we moved out to the museum about, I don't remember what year it was, but and restored it. It cost quite a bit of money. But the nice thing about it, I'm trying to think back about 3 years ago, John McClary, who is the internationally known sculptor of Abraham Lincoln statues, he's the one who sculptured the statue that sits across the street from the museum here in Springfield.
Yes.
He has statues in Havana, Cuba, Moscow, Charleston.
All of Lincoln or different?
All of Lincoln, Taylorville,
Right.
Peoria, New Salem State Park. He has 2 statues of Abraham Lincoln in Japan, and I'm responsible for one of them. John was one of my students at Milligan University in 1959, and 30 years later, we were standing at President Kennedy's grave in Washington at Arlington Cemetery. We'd gone with the church choir, and he came to me and said, "Good morning, Mr. Schilling. You know who I am?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, you were my teacher at Milligan." I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Yes, 1959, I remember." And I had not seen him in 30 years. He said, and I don't like to say this, "Do you know what I remember most about you?" And I said, "I have no idea." He said, "You wore such pretty suits." I said, "Forget it. Did you learn anything?" He said, "Well, I taught school 27 years, and later we became acquainted, and I found out his grandfather was the Elkhart Methodist minister in 1923 or 4. His mother graduated from Elkhart High School.
So there's an Elkhart connection.
His grandmother, Park, was a cousin of my grandmother, Schilling, Ohio. So we're cousins, distant cousins. He has a beautiful studio out north of Decatur.
And he's done that full time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, with regard to the statue, he has a statue in some museum. I'm not sure where in Japan. In my travels, I've been so fortunate. In 1998, I was in Lake Louise, Canada, and wanting to take a picture of the sunrise over the mountain, and my camera didn't work. I walked over to this young couple, Japanese couple, who were there, and I said, would you be able to help me with my camera? And she did not understand English, but he did. And he said, no, I can't help you, but I take your picture and mail it. So he took pictures, and we talked, and he interpreted to his wife. We got back to the hotel, and now he was 27 years old, I think, at that time. He said, I want to say something before we part. I said, okay. He said, we want to tell you we've enjoyed our visit with you, and I had a wonderful grandpa in Japan, and now I want you to be my grandpa in America. He threw his arm around me and hugged me and kissed me, and his wife did. And so he sent me the picture, and I said, Hiroshi, I'd like to reimburse you. He said, no, Grandpa, it's my pleasure to send you the picture, but when we come to visit you, we'd like to have lunch. He was joking. I asked him to come, and they came for the Decatur celebration in 1998 and spent 5 days with me. And as such, they learned to know John McClary and a good many of my friends. I'm talking about travel now. In 2000, he said, why don't you come to visit me? I never dreamed of going to Japan at my age. So anyway, he invited me to come, and I said...
This is in
2000, 7 years ago.
So.
Yeah, I'd be 86 years old. So anyway, he invited me to come to Japan, and I took with me my friend Dale Mellon, whose wife was in a nursing home, and my wife had passed away in February of 1996. So we went, and we spent about 10 days with them in Japan, and we were treated like royalty. We had lunch at their home. We had lunch at his parents' home. We had lunch at her parents' home. We traveled 700 miles. We saw the temples. We saw the pageants. It was a holiday. And the highlight of the trip, as beautiful as it was when we went to his parents' home on a Sunday afternoon. None of them spoke English. When we got there, the father said, he wanted me to sit down. We sat down at the end of the table. He had 2 pieces of paper on which were English and Japanese sentences. And he said, my name is Tanaka, age 59. My wife is such Tanaka. We want to thank you for the kindness you showed our son and daughter-in-law when they visited you. You are welcome to our home. We hope you have a good visit. Spoken in perfect English. I said to Hiroshi, how could your father do that? He said 3 weeks before you were to arrive, he worked in a railroad office with a man who knew English, and he practiced. To me, that was the highlight of the trip. Oh, yeah. That was the highest honor you could give.
Now the connection to the sculpture now.
Well, so anyway, then they say they were here for the Decatur celebration in 2000, and we went, or 1999, and we went, and I've got pictures of all of them, and we went to, here they are.
There was some newspaper coverage of it?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And we went to, it came back just 3 years ago, he and Hiroshi, and they had met John Baird and John McClary and a good many of my friends. The first year they were here, he was having his birthday, so I had a big birthday party at my home for him and John Baird, who were having birthday. This time, we spent Sunday afternoon. I took him Sunday afternoon. We spent Sunday afternoon at John McClary's home and his studio, and when we left, John said to me, "Here is a statue. It's the exact replica of the one that's in this museum, about this high." He said, "I'm giving this to you, but I want you..."
Which museum? The museum in Decatur?
No,
in Springfield.
Yeah, it's a replica of that. And
the one across the street from the museum.
It's a small one.
Right.
He said, "I'm giving this to you, but I want you to give it to Hiroshi." And I gave it to him, and he was thrilled to death. So there were 2 statues there. Well, that's my story on that. Yeah. How fortunate I've been.
Really?
So I hear from him almost about a year ago. He called me one Saturday night. At 10 o'clock in Decatur on Saturday night, it's 2 p.m. on Sunday afternoon in Japan. He says, "Grandpa, I want you to go to your computer and do what I asked you to do." And we did. I did. And as a result, I got a little webcam. Now, when he calls, when he's on computer and I'm on computer, I talk to him just like I see you.
Wow.
real exciting.
And this relationship with him has lasted now for how many years?
Since 1998.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And it'll last forever.
Yeah.
He'll be back to see me again, I hope.
Any other travel-related stories you want to talk about, or?
Well, I mentioned 75 and 76. After Rachel, my wife, died, I felt free to travel. I didn't want to go off and leave her before that. So in 1998, 1997, I'd always wanted to go to Alaska. So I decided to do it. So I took my 2 daughters and son-in-law Mike Bryant and my grandson Matthew, and we went to Alaska and did the we flew
the cruise.
We flew from Seattle to Fairbanks, and then took the train down to Anchorage and to Seward, and did 7 days on the Crown Princess. That made me want to travel more. So the next year, I did the Greek islands with Dr. Nichols. We traveled in what we call the footsteps of Paul. A wonderful experience. I think my dates might be wrong. I spent July in the Hawaiian Islands, and it was in this was 98. And then I took the train trip from Vancouver to Jasper, down to Lake Louise, and that's where I met my Japanese friends.
Yeah.
In 1999, I did the Columbia River cruise. I went to Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. I spent Thanksgiving 10 days in Mexico City with my friend, rather distant cousin, Ruth. Her name is Ruth Braille Love, or Ortega Braille. I spent 10 days in Mexico City. So
and you're still traveling?
Well, yes. In 1993, I went by train to Boston and did the New England states. Went down to North Carolina on a tour. I'm really excited now. A week from this afternoon, I'll be on the train headed to the state of Washington. My friend Dale and I are going.
Probably been to Washington, D.C. before, haven't you?
No, this is Washington State.
Oh, Washington State. Okay.
Washington, D.C. I've been to Washington, D.C. nine times.
Yes.
No, we're going to Washington State, up through Minneapolis, Bismarck, and Montana, Idaho, and Washington. Dale has cousins at Bellingham. We'll spend about 5 or 6 days there, and then we'll take the train to Los Angeles, where I'll visit my twin brother's widow and my niece, and bring back the southern route. So travel is so, well, you learn a lot. And I think my daughters, Mary, my older daughter, is 8 years old, my younger daughter. When Mary was 24 and Susan was 16, Mary went with another teacher and took a group of students to Scotland for summer school. And they went to King's College at Aberdeen, Scotland. And when they came home, I said, girls, tell me, what was the most exciting thing, what was the most pleasant experience you had? And each of them said, Dad, it was the people. And I think that's true anywhere. That's what I found out in Germany, Scotland, everywhere. People.
You meet somebody from Japan and they become lifelong friends. I remember in our last interview, you said you wanted to talk a little bit about your homes in Decatur. Is there something you wanted to talk about in terms of the various homes you've had in Decatur? Or?
You see, when we came down from River Forest, we lived in two rooms in a garage apartment. We came down to Decatur and we rented an apartment across the street from Road School, which is being torn down, or which is being renovated now. In 1950, my mother-in-law, unfortunately, had passed away, and I was 35 years old, almost 35. Had no money to buy a home, but we bought a little home, 4-room home on Sunset Avenue, and lived there 4 years. Then we bought a very nice bungalow over near Milligan University on Woodlawn. We lived there for 24 years. And then we moved to California Avenue, which is a ranch house next to Lake Tokugawa. That's the lake of Decatur, named after the sister city of Japan. And we lived there for 4 years. No, we lived there until 1994. In 1994, my daughter Susan and husband Mike Bryant were living out on Hillcrest Boulevard, out near School Golf Course. And there was a vacant lot second door from them. And I did not, the home on California Avenue had a lot of steps. And I wanted to be close to my family, particularly since my wife was very ill. So I bought the lot and built a very comfortable home there of 3 bedrooms and 3.5 baths.
How old were you when you decided to build a home on a lot?
Well, that was in 1994, so I was 80. Yeah.
That's.
I had a wonderful experience, though. It's a flat lot. The backyard, the fence in the backyard separates my backyard from the conservation district. And so I got to see the deers and the raccoons and the possums and all that, you know.
Right.
And so I built this home and enjoyed it. And as I said, I like people. So what I do, the first year was 95. I spent much of the time at the nursing home, almost every day, and took care of the yard, had the water and all. But I began asking people to come. In that very first year, even with my wife in the nursing home, I cooked and served lunch or dinner for 60 people. Now, 10 of them stayed all night, and they came from 5 states. I would have a very good, very good fellow principal who retired in 1971 to Florida. He would come through every June on his way to Colorado and stop and visit with me. And then in September, he'd come back through, and he'd stay all night with me. So I had a real, real good time.
Anything else you want to say about Decatur's history or any of the cultural events there, or?
Decatur is very fortunate to have Millikan University, which was established in 1902 by James Millikan. James Millikan was a big landowner, a banker, and he told the city of Decatur that if they would, he'd give $200,000 if they would match it, and that's how Millikan University began. It was a part of Lincoln College, which was a Presbyterian school, but they separated from that. So that's the beginning. And who came to dedicate the Millikan University? President Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt.
Were you there?
1902. Not hardly. And it's a very enriching place. We have Kirkland Fine Arts Center.
Now, which Roosevelt?
Theodore Roosevelt, 1902.
Teddy.
President.
You could have made the Franklin Roosevelt event.
Pardon?
You could have made the Franklin Roosevelt event, maybe.
Well, I can talk about the president too, because I've seen most of them.
Yeah.
No, Mrs. Kirkland was a very wealthy woman. She had a
Fine Arts Center's named after her.
Well, yes, she had a big pharmaceutical company, and so she built Kirkland Center. Paid the money for it, and we have wonderful. We have concerts, we have plays, we have everything. It's really one of the cultural centers. And then, of course, in addition to that, we have Richmond Community College, which is another big asset. Right. And I think maybe you know, too, and I know Dr. Saunders, who's the president there, graduate of Illinois State University, the Farm Progress Show for the nation. 2 years ago, they decided that the Farm Progress Show should be held only in 2 places in the United States, one in Iowa and one in Decatur. So every other year for the next 20 years, the Farm Progress Show will be in Decatur.
Big show.
They held August the 28th, 29th, and 30th this year, and they had 300,000 people there.
That's a big show.
Dale and I we were fortunate. We knew some people at the college, and they gave us free tickets and a cart, and we toured the Farm Progress Show. 175 planes flew into Decatur. They came from not only from almost every state, but the foreign countries.
Do you think Decatur does a pretty good job of making its connection to the Lincoln story, or what's your perspective on that?
Well, Lincoln came.
I think I've heard statements that Decatur probably is as important to Lincoln's history as maybe as important as Springfield or some of these other locations in
We
the
like
state.
to think so.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the Springfield people approve. Lincoln came to with his family to Decatur at age 21 in 1830, and stayed all night right there down in the center of town. Went out to about 7 miles west of Decatur and built a home. And it was a very, very bad winter. It was one of the worst winters that anybody ever had. And I don't know how long the Lincoln family lived. I think maybe a year or two. Abraham took off and went to Springfield, or we went to New Salem. New Salem. The family went back down there to Charleston.
Mm.
And it was so Abraham Lincoln really got his start, you might say, in New Salem. I'm not sure, but Lincoln, and of course he studied law, and Oglesby came to Decatur. Let's see, he was, I've forgotten the exact date. He was 9 years old, so 1925.
Talking about the governor.
About 1883, 9 years old. Oglesby came to Decatur because he had two sisters living here. He also had an uncle and aunt, but his sisters were Mrs. Prater and I can't remember the other name right now. But he established himself in Decatur. He went back to Kentucky and worked down there, but he finally came back and he studied law and met Lincoln, as I remember, at age 6. He was 16 years old. I think there was a difference. If Oglesby was born in July 25th,
What were the circumstances of their meeting? Do you recall?
No, just through law.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
At such a young age.
Yeah, and they became very fast friends. In fact, I read in Dr. Plummer's book, autobiography of Lincoln, Oglesby, Lincoln said that Governor Oglesby is his closest personal friend.
Mm. Yeah, let's talk about that. I noticed you were acknowledged in the acknowledgments of the Plummer book. Did he contact you on several occasions to talk about the Oglesby book?
Dr. Plummer is a retired professor of history at Illinois State University. And he used to come to the Oglesby Mansion in Decatur for social occasions, and I became acquainted with him. And he found out that I had known the Oglesby family. So I took him down to Greenwood Cemetery, where the governor's first wife and 3 children are buried, and talked with him about different aspects of the Oglesby family. And every time I talked with him, I kept thinking, so many people talk about Lincoln and Oglesby, and their facts are not accurate. So I kept thinking, does he really know what's going on? Well, he did. 23 years of research to do that book, published in 2001. I went to the library to get a reserved copy to read it because I wasn't sure I wanted to buy it. Then in the meantime, I went over to Haynes and Essex grocery store, or bookstore, and asked if they had a copy, and they showed it to me. And I opened it up, and it only took, instantly I knew it was a masterpiece. And so, yes, he did.
So you studied the book, and you're very impressed with the factual nature of it.
He did give me recognition for helping him,
right.
A little bit.
What part of Oglesby's life did he ask you about with regard to the book?
Well, of course, I didn't know the governor. He died in 1899. But I knew Mrs. Oglesby. I saw her many times. Never did talk with her. I'd see her riding with her chauffeur out through the country.
Let's your connections to the let's talk about the Oglesby's family.
Okay.
Now the connections go back to Elkhart. So let's just open this up with you describing your connections to the family.
Governor Oglesby, after he served his third term as governor of Illinois, moved to Elkhart from Lincoln in 1889. Built a house, a very nice house, on the site of the first white cabin, the first white settlement. He used the fireplace of the Latham home for his home built. And he lived in that home until 1991, and in May of 1991, that house burned.
Oh, 91. His family?
1891.
1891, right.
I have he retired from the third term of governor in 1889, and his father-in-law, John Gillette, died in 1888. In 1890, beginning January, Governor Oglesby kept a daily diary, and I have a copy of it. Daily diary.
Now, tell us how you acquired that.
Joanne Forrest is a historian at the Oglesby Mansion, and in some ways she secured a copy and she gave it to me.
Huh. And what's been your involvement with the mansion there in Decatur? Have you been on the board there? Or?
No. I was there when they opened it up. The conservation owns it. The Decatur, the Macon County Conservation owns it.
Right.
It was a house that had been run down. It was bad. And the Conservation District bought it from, I think I can't remember.
There was a company that was using it, wasn't it?
Well, they had a grain elevator business in there,
Right.
And they bought, I think, I'm not sure about the date of it, but they restored it, and we had some very knowledgeable people who worked real hard. Mr. Lindley Hurt was one of them. It's Martha Montgomery, who was very much involved in the historical side. She helped restore it. It's put back as much as we know possible, the way it was built in 1874. Now you saw it.
Yes, I did.
Beautiful place.
Very impressive. Very
beautiful
impressive.
place.
Let's get back to your family's
Okay,
connections
well,
to the
all right.
Oglesby family.
In 1899, the governor died, and well, in the first place, after the house he built on the side of the first white settlement burned, they built this big 40-room mansion. I've got the picture of it here. I can show you on the Elkhart Hill, and my father had two sisters, Aunt Strepta and Aunt Mary Van Aunt Mary Schilling, Aunt Strepta. Aunt Strepta was a maid in the Oglesby home.
During what years?
1899, when the governor died.
Okay.
And she told me many times of her visit with the governor. He was advanced in age, and she'd say, Mrs. Oglesby, I've done all my work today. What do you want me to do? She said, go down to the library and talk with the governor. He's lonesome. And she'd go down and talk with him for maybe an hour, and he'd tell her about his experiences in Kentucky. I asked Aunt Strepta if she'd like to do a conversation, a taped conversation. She said she would, but I never got around to it. She died at age 97.
Right. Do you recall any of those stories that the governor told her?
Well, he used to talk, he used a sort of a drawl, I guess. He liked it. One of his stories he tells, when he was 9 years old, I think it was, and by the way, I did write the chapter for the Macon County history book for Oglesby. It's got some errors.
Yeah.
But anyway, he liked to tell the story of when his parents died and two siblings died with cholera. And that's when he decided to come to Decatur. But in the settlement of the estate of his parents, there was a slave named Uncle Tim. And he loved Uncle Tim. And he told Uncle Tim when he left, he said, someday when I grow up, I'm going to come back and buy you and free you. And he did.
Did he? Did he?
He'd tell that story. He loved to tell that story. He went back, and Uncle Tim saw him coming and said, my Lord, my God, my little boy.
Yeah. Well, he had a strong abolitionist.
Oh, yes.
Bias,
so then later on, Mrs. Oglesby, the governor had 4 children by his second marriage. The first one was Felicity, a girl, and born in about 1875. They were married in 1874. See, Governor Oglesby's first wife, Anna White, died while he was in the governorship of the first governorship in the mansion here in Springfield. Then he remarried. Well, he became he came back to Decatur after the first term with his children, and then he married the second Mrs. Oglesby in 1874, on the Elkhart Hill in the Gillette home. And
Was this before he became governor?
no, this is his second term.
Second term.
And
okay.
then you see, if you remember the history of Oglesby, he was in this. He served only a few days in the second term. Then he became a United States Senator.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, he had been. He fought in the Mexican War, and Cerro Gordo Street and El Dorado Streets are named after Oglesby.
Mm-hmm.
He named them. Governor Oglesby also went to. I'm backing up a little bit. In 1849, he, with a group of men from Decatur, one of them was Mr. Petticourt, a brother-in-law, they went to California Gold Rush, spent 91 days on the road,
Mm-hmm.
came back a very wealthy man, came back with $5,000. And then he decided that he liked to travel, so he did a year's tour of European countries.
Mm-hmm.
And came back and got married to Anna White, had 4 children. In his first term of governor, he was to be inaugurated, I think, like January the 10th, but the inauguration was postponed because little Dickie, 3 years old, had diphtheria
Mm-hmm.
and died.
Oh.
So his inauguration was postponed. Yeah. Then he stayed in Decatur, and then he became second-term governor in 1872.
Mm-hmm. Any Lincoln-related stories that your relatives passed on?
Going back to, after the governor died in 1893, in 1899, Mrs. Oglesby and her daughter Felicity would spend the winter on the French Riviera, Rome. They go to Rome, and then they'd be back in summertime. Again, in Mrs. Oglesby's older years, be the 1920s, my Aunt Mary Schilling Van Fossen would serve as a cook and a maid for them. Oh. And she knew Mrs. Oglesby very, very well.
In the mansion. Yeah.
Mrs. Oglesby died in November 20th of 1928. And at that time, Felicity had been married in 1924 to a count in Italy. I always like to say his name is Count Alessandro Cenci di Bonganetti. And the Felicity, when she died, was buried in Rome. Then they had John, who served as lieutenant governor with Governor Loudon, and Richard was a man that he died young. I didn't know him, but I knew John Oglesby. Then they had Jasper, the baby. John Oglesby, after Mrs. Oglesby died in 1928, he met a widow in Springfield named Mrs. Augusta Smith, and he married her in 1929. And in the meantime, he had renovated that beautiful home on Elkhart Hill. And Mrs. Smith, his new bride, had a German maid named Lena Carroll. Well, he needed a cook, so he kept thinking, where do I get a cook? My grandparents, Van Fossen, lived on a farm owned by Oglesby, southeast of Cornland. My grandfather died September 1st, 1926, on the Oglesby farm. And so my grandmother, the only thing she could claim was 9 living children. That was about all she had. So she came to Decatur as a maid in a home for a family named Burns. Well, John Oglesby had eaten many a meal at my grandparents' home and knew that my grandmother could cook. So some way he learned of grandmother's availability, and he came to Decatur to see grandmother in October of 1929 with his new bride, and met in the Hotel Orlando. And at that time, he offered her a position as cook. All she did was cook. She cooked $12 a week in her boarding room, and she stayed there almost, I think, maybe 7 or 8.
The home in Elkhart, on the hill.
So, and that was the reason that we got very well. Well, of course, we were in school with the grandchildren, and we saw John Oglesby at the post office every morning. We saw his half-brother, Mr. Keyes, every morning at the post office. Yeah. But we were free to visit grandmother anytime we wanted to. And one of the nicest...
So you spent many times in the mansion then, probably.
I go up. See, I was 16 years old, or in 1930, and I wasn't well, so I'd go up and spend the whole day with grandmother, and in 1929, grandmother asked John Oglesby if it'd be all right if we could come and spend New Year's Eve with him.
Mm-hmm.
So my twin brother and my mother, we spent New Year's Eve 1929 at the Oglesby home.
1929.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And Lena, the maid, showed us the home, and oh, what a home it was. What a home.
Right.
It's beautiful. You see, not only did we know the Oglesby family, we knew all the, you might say, the dignitaries. The centers came, and
Mm-hmm.
the business people. One of the things I remember in high school, it would not be frequently we would see a private railway car on the siding of the railroad, and they'd be up visiting Elkhart, John Oglesby.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about your perspective on Oglesby as a politician and as a, since you've read his diaries and I'm sure you've studied him quite a good deal.
Well,
what can you tell me about him from your perspective?
In reading Dr. Plummer's book, I learned something I didn't really know, and that is Oglesby didn't always win an election.
Yeah.
He didn't win all of them,
Right.
but he won a good many of them. And Mrs. Jane Johns, early pioneer of Decatur, wrote a history of Decatur in 1909, and she said Richard J. Oglesby was Decatur's most distinguished citizen, and I think he was. He was loved by everybody. Not everybody. Not everybody. He had his enemies. His worst enemy was one of his brother-in-laws.
Yeah.
Won't go into that.
Yeah.
But it's a well-known fact. I'm not telling any stories.
Yeah.
It's a well-known fact. His name was Littler.
Oh, is that right? And what's the story on him?
Well, let's see if I don't know if I can tell it or not. They wanted to put something, some murals or something in the new State House, and Oglesby was the governor when they started the Capitol.
Right.
And they wanted him to be recognized.
The new Capitol?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they wanted him to be recognized, and Littler was dead against it, and he fought and fought and fought against it.
Oh, is that right? Huh.
That's all in the book.
Yeah.
I'm not telling you stories.
Right. Now, I know that you got involved with a campaign to make sure that Governor Oglesby was recognized at the museum. You want to tell us a little bit about that, or?
Yes and no.
Well,
when I came to visit the museum 2 times, I could not find any recognition of Oglesby being the person responsible for naming Lincoln the Roosevelt president.
you want to tell that story?
Well, I think it's all right to tell.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think Dr. Schwartz will care.
Oh.
So I came over.
But let's put it in historical perspective here. Tell the story of Oglesby's role in giving Lincoln that particular name, and that became a political slogan,
Okay,
obviously,
yeah.
of his campaign.
It was in May the 10th, 1860. The Republican State Convention was being held in Decatur.
Mm-hmm.
Lincoln had known the first year he had split a lot of rails, and Oglesby knew that, so he took Lincoln's cousin John Hanks and went out to the Lincoln Farm west of near Harristown, and brought back a couple of rails by horse and buggy, and at the appropriate time, he and John Hanks or somebody, they went marching down the aisle and they had Lincoln the Real Spirit,
Right.
and that's how it got it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So you felt that was an important enough event, obviously, because that stuck with Lincoln, obviously, and Plummer wrote an entire book under the title of that.
He was known as the Real
Right,
Spirit
right.
president. Well, anyway, see, I'm a little hesitant to tell this story because I don't want. Well, anyway, it's a true story.
Yeah, well.
And I don't think Dr. Schwartz will care if I tell it.
No.
When I came over with John McClary for the dedication of the statue in August of 2006, I was there, and I thought, well, I'd like to talk with Dr. Schwartz, but he left before I got a chance to see him. So I talked with Mayor Davlin and his assistant, Jim Donlan,
Mm-hmm.
and I told him, I said, I'm just a little bit concerned. I hope I'm telling this. I'm telling it right, but I don't want to offend anybody. And I said, I told him I said. I'm not criticizing, but I'm concerned. And Mr. Donald said, "Here's my telephone number. I want you to call me. I'm going to come to Decatur." So he did, and we began to figure out how we could get Oglesby recognized. And we had a meeting at the Oglesby Mansion with 18 people. The representatives were there, and
State reps?
State representatives. They weren't there, but the representative. We had Oglesby Mansion people, officers, and we had the Historic Society people. We had Kim Bauer, Mark Sorensen, and the mayor's assistant mayor, city manager.
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't. The plan we had did not take place because in the previous week I had met at the retired teachers luncheon all the legislators.
Mm-hmm.
One of them being Senator Brady, and I talked to him about it, and he said, well, "Give me your telephone number." So I had a letter from his assistant who said she had talked with Dr. Swartz and he didn't think he could do that. And
what did you want to accomplish? Just some sort of a recognition of that particular event?
I just wanted Governor Oglesby to be recognized as the author of Lincoln the Real Spirit President. Mm-hmm. That's all.
Just recognition.
So anyway, then on Tuesday, after that meeting of the retired teachers, Senator Brady called me and he said that he had talked with Dr. Swartz and Dr. Swartz was going to call me. And wonderful. Dr. Swartz called me the next day and I talked with him and he said, "Well, I don't know whether we can do that or not." He said, "There are so many people who had connection with Lincoln, we can't focus upon all of them." And I said, "I know, but is there anyone who you think was closer to Lincoln than Oglesby?" Well, he said, "Maybe not." So he finally said, "We have two kinds of exhibits. One is a permanent one is a temporary one." And he said that we do have a permanent exhibit with Lincoln's rail, and we have Governor Oglesby's speech of his dedication of the tomb. Governor Oglesby had served as the chairman of the commission that built the tomb because, see, going back, Governor Oglesby was in Washington at the time of the assassination and made all the arrangements for the funeral. So anyway, Dr. Swartz couldn't have been nicer. He couldn't have been nicer. And after 2 or 3 telephone conversations, he said, "Well, I believe we could do it." And I said, "That's all we want."
And so what exactly happened? They put a plaque up?
I called Dr. Swartz, I think on a Monday in October a year ago, and he said, "I just finished a letter to you and with a copy of Senator Brady." And I said, say I'll mail it this evening. I said, "Save your postage. I'm coming to Springfield. I'd like to talk with you." And he was very, very gracious, very gracious. I said, "I'd like to speak with you." He said, "I'd like to talk with you too." So I said, "Well, how do I see you?" He said, "Well, you come into the library, not the museum. You come into the library, there'll be two guards there. You tell them who you are, and they'll bring you up to my office." Had a wonderful visit with him. He couldn't have been nicer. Mm. And I think it was very interesting because Dr. Swartz had a friend named James Hickey, who had been the Lincoln curator for years. Mm-hmm. And when he asked me if I knew James Hickey, and I said, "Well, we grew up across the field from each other."
In Elkhart.
Uh-huh.
Right.
The field. James is now deceased, but he served many years. James was a noted Lincoln scholar. Uh-huh. He even visited some of the family back in Vermont. Well, James is deceased now, but anyway, Dr. Swartz said that they would do it, and all they did was just, they had it already. They already had him named the Lincoln. They already had in the display case. They said Lincoln was the real spirit president, but it didn't say who did it. Yeah. And they put. Now, if you go to the library, and I've seen it, you go in where it's a campaign,
right,
and it's up on the wall. Right. It's not down. It's up on the wall. And
it's in a display case.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah. And it made the Oglesby Mansion people very happy. It made the historic people very happy, and everybody was very happy.
Governor Oglesby got his recognition.
I give all the credit to Dr. Swartz.
Yeah. That's a great story. Anything else you'd like to say about the Oglesby legacy stories? What the particular diaries that you had? What period of time or did they cover? Was there anything interesting in those diaries that?
Because see, John Oglesby died in 1938, and after that the home was pretty well closed up.
Yeah.
The home was left to Jasper had two sons by the first marriage, Richard and John. Richard's first wife was Marjorie Lanham of Elkhart, and she is the one who became she inherited the Oglesby mansion, and she only lived there in the summertime, and it went downhill, 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 and finally about, I don't know what year, but a man named Merle Welch bought the estate from Mrs. Drake, who was the governor's step-granddaughter. And
who was attached to the Drake Hotel
Mrs. Drake
family.
was
Right.
Bill Drake, whose father and uncle were owners of the Drake Hotel, yes. See, Mrs. Oglesby had been married to a man named Hiram Keyes, and he was killed by a horse accident. Had one son named Hiram, and he had three children, Elizabeth, who married Bill Drake, and Susan, who married Robert Greene in Missouri, and John. Susan was the youngest one, and so Merle Welch bought the home and cleared the timber, which is very upsetting to the village, but he has established a suburb, or you might say, he was able to get his land, about 97 acres, annexed to the city of Decatur, city of Elkhart. And now he sells lots up there, beautiful homes. On the Oglesby, which is called Oglehurst, there's a beautiful home there. Another very important thing is that concrete bridge, the arch bridge. That bridge
By
was
the cemetery there?
That bridge was built in 1915 by Mrs. Oglesby in memory of her only brother, John Gillette. And it joined the Oglesby, you might say, front yard with the cemetery. And of course, you know, the governor's buried in the mausoleum. I was reading I looked up internet, and of course, time passes. But what was said on the internet about that mausoleum was not what is up to date. In the mausoleum today are buried the governor and Mrs. Oglesby, Richard, one son, and not Jasper, but...
Richard was the lieutenant governor.
No. John was lieutenant governor.
John was lieutenant.
In there's the governor and Mrs. Oglesby, and Richard, a brother of John Oglesby,
Okay.
and then John Oglesby and his widow. They're buried there. Felicity's buried in Rome, and Jasper's buried in the old Latham Cemetery.
Anything else on Oglesby you want to, before we move on?
Well, as I said, we were in school with him, and
What was your sense of him as a politician and as a leader during that period, since you've studied him a little bit? Any way you would characterize him as?
Well, I think from what I read, he must have been a very much loved and successful in his business, knew what he was doing, but to be governor 3 times.
Right.
See, until Governor Thompson served 4 terms, he was the only one that served more than 3 terms.
Right. And they weren't consecutive, which is even...
Now, I did know, I knew Richard Oglesby, the grandson. I knew his second wife. I've had lunch with her down at Taylorville, or out in the country, really. And then Richard's... Richard Oglesby's son, Jasper's son Richard, by his first marriage, had by his second wife, I knew the great-granddaughter, Yolande Knight, and she came down from Glenview, Illinois, when she learned that I knew her father, and spent 2 nights at my home, and we talked about the Oglesby family. It's an interesting subject.
Yeah. Any other famous people you've had encounters with over the years, or that you can recall?
You want to hear all that?
Well, as much as you want to share.
Well, I've been very fortunate. I've been at the right place, the right time. Yeah. I came to Springfield with my parents and my brother, twin brother, to see President Hoover. I loved history.
Yeah.
So we saw President Hoover. I did not see Roosevelt. I saw Eisenhower twice. I went to church with him, and I attended church with him in Washington in 1956.
What were the circumstances there?
Well, I was there for the Association of Child Education Conference, and I went to Presbyterian Church, and President Mrs. Eisenhower were there, and Roy Evans and what was his name? Dale Evans and Roy.
Oh, Roy Rogers and Dale Evans?
They were there. And I remember when the service was over, they took Roy Rogers and Dale Evans out first, and then they brought out Mrs. Roosevelt, President Mrs. Eisenhower. I knew John Kennedy. I saw him in Springfield. I shook hands with President Carter's wife in the Holiday Inn. I saw...
Just chance meetings for the most part, or
you
were there for events when they were there?
Mrs. Carter, when President Carter was running, she was in Decatur, and she was at the Holiday Inn. After church, I went out and I ran into her in the hotel and had a visit with her. I didn't see the president. I saw Gerald Ford. I saw Reagan.
During appearances in Decatur for the most part?
Yeah. Well, yes. I didn't see the elder Bush, but I did meet, I saw our president.
Any thoughts about those presidents in particular? Did you have
well,
favorites? Or,
you know, again, I said I was the right place, the right time. In 1968...
I don't sense that you're highly political, so maybe you would...
Well,
would you call yourself a Republican or a Democrat? Or
I'm a Republican.
Okay.
I voted for one Democrat.
One Democrat. What Democrat was
President Johnson.
Oh, Lyndon Johnson?
Mm-hmm.
In 64?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
In 1960...
Barry Goldwater was just a little too extreme for you?
I was a little scared of him.
Yeah. Might have been that mushroom cloud ad.
But you know, I voted for President Johnson in 1964. In 1967, I again was in Washington for the Association of Child Education. And I had been a guest at the Indiana breakfast in the Washington Hilton Hotel. And walking down from the Indiana breakfast to the Illinois breakfast, I met a woman named Lois Johnson from Nebraska, whom I'd known many years. And she stopped me and said, "Mr. Schilling, I want you to meet someone. I want you to meet someone." And I said, "Okay." And she introduced me to Evelyn Lincoln, her cousin, who was President Kennedy's personal secretary for 12 years. And so when I got into my breakfast, the delegation of about 100 from Illinois said, "You went where you got a free breakfast?" And I said, "Yes, I did." But I said, "Well, why are you late?" And I said, "Well, outside this door is a very famous person." And I stopped to talk with her. And so I told him who it was. And Lizzie Johnson, our black teacher, jumped up and went out, and she brought in Mrs. Lincoln and Lois Johnson, Mrs. Lincoln. And Lois Johnson, I introduced her, and she introduced Miss Lincoln, and she gave us a nice little greeting.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievably, that was on a Wednesday morning. The next evening, in the same almost identical spot, I shook hands with President Johnson and Mrs. Bill Johnson.
At what hotel was this in?
Washington Hilton.
Washington Hilton. Yeah.
As a result of my meeting with Mrs. Lincoln, I made no effort to keep in touch with her, but she would write me letters. She'd call me on the telephone and talk about campaign. And she'd always say, "I want you to come to visit me." She was very free to talk about her relationship with President. She ran President Kennedy's office for 12 years. So anyway, in 1991, when our church choir was going to Washington and Dr. Nichols was going to speak at the National City Christian Church, I went with the choir. I don't sing. And so I called Mrs. Lincoln and said I was coming to Washington and I'd like to have dinner with her. And so she said, "Fine." And she said, "I'll make arrangements for," I told her I was at Washington Hilton. She said, "I'll make arrangements for dinner at Duke Zeber's restaurant." So I said, "Well, Mrs. Lincoln," I didn't know her husband. I never met him. May I bring someone with me? And she said, well, that'd be delightful. So on May of 1991, we met her and her husband at Duke Lieber's restaurant. I took with me a young man named Scott Critchfield and his future bride. They were not engaged, but that weekend they became engaged. And we sat and talked with Mrs. Lincoln and Dr. Lincoln for about 3 hours.
Any interesting stories about Kennedy?
I
Or did she
can't-
just talk about herself
well,
mostly?
no. They grew up in Nebraska, and she was a volunteer for President Kennedy. When she wanted to volunteer for some of the congressmen, she chose President Kennedy because she said she knew he'd be the president someday. So she and Mrs. President Nixon, I did see President Nixon in Decatur too. President Nixon's secretary, whose name I can't remember, and Ms. Lincoln used to argue about which one was going to be the president.
I think her name was Wood.
Yeah,
She's the one that erased the
erased the tape.
the tape, yes.
So anyway, we sat there, and she talked about she was with the president's assassination in Dallas.
Was she there? Yes.
And I hesitate telling you all that she told me.
Yeah.
It was sad.
Yeah.
It was sad.
Don't want to tell the story.
Well, I don't know whether I should or not. It's
Okay.
It's a true story. But she said she rode with the president back. She said,
Was she in a car behind the
No,
president, or
no, she wasn't with him at all.
she wasn't in the motorcade?
She refused to go into the hospital.
Yeah.
But what she told me was, she said, Mr. Schilling, when you on that plane coming back, it was one grand party. They laughed, they talked, they were so happy.
That is
The
interesting.
Johnsons.
Yes, interesting.
She said they laughed
Yeah.
all the way to Washington.
Did she have an opinion about the assassination and who was involved, or
No, we didn't
she
talk
never had an opinion
No.
about that.
But you know, again, I hesitate. On the surface, the Johnsons and the Kennedys got along pretty well, but not really.
All right.
I think everybody knows that, don't they?
Yes.
I remember in the Democratic convention I watched all the time in, I think it was San Diego, I believe. President John.
Could be San Francisco, but that's all right.
No, it was
Were we talking about when Kennedy was nominated?
1960. Yeah.
Oh, 1960? That might have been Chicago, I
No, it
believe.
was San Diego.
Oh, San Diego.
I
You
believe.
got a better memory than me?
I believe.
I think the Republican convention
remember,
was in Chicago in 60. You're right.
I remember watching, and President Kennedy said, my fellow Americans and Democrats, if you can make me the president and President Johnson, or Senator Johnson, the vice president, we'll have a great, no, he said, we'll leave President Johnson as the head of the Senate. Well, and this is on tape. I've got a video of this. In a hotel after John Kennedy was elected, he and Bobby were in a hotel together with Mrs. Lincoln. I've got a tape of it. And so they said, who will we have for vice president? And after a long pause, Bobby turned and said, we have no choice. We have to have Johnson.
They need the state
And
of
why?
Texas. Why?
Because Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover were like that. And if J. Edgar Hoover, if they didn't take Johnson, J. Edgar Hoover would expose Kennedy's womanizing. That's a true story.
Yeah. I think I have heard references to that. Although I guess I had never understood how close Johnson and Hoover were, maybe.
Very, very
But I
close.
knew that there was
They
a
were-
lot of...
They were inseparable.
yeah, interesting. Interesting.
Well, I've told some stories that maybe I shouldn't have told.
Oh, no. These are interesting.
But
very
I
interesting.
had a great life.
Yeah. You have received some awards recently. Would you like to talk
Yeah.
about those? Anything in particular
You
that...
know, I hesitate doing this because I don't want to sound boastful, but I've been very fortunate. I was of course, I received. You see, when you grow old, I've learned this much. There are two times in life that one gets a lot of attention. One is when he's born and when when he's an old man. About 3 years ago, approximately 3 years ago, I had contacted the executive secretary of the Association of Child Education International in Washington. I had not had any contact for a number of years. And in talking with him, I've never met him. We became acquainted. His name was Odlin, Jerry Odlin. And finally he called me and said, we are going to honor you. And I said, what do you mean honor me? He said, well, we're having our conference in Arizona, and we are going to give you an award. And I said, what? He said, we're going to give you a certificate for distinguished service to the association. So I got that.
How many years with that particular organization?
I was with him for about, approximately 25 years.
25 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've won some local awards too.
Well, anyway, he gave me that, and then I have been given awards from the Historical Society. Just yesterday, at the museum, the Historical Society, we had a big meeting, and 3 people were being honored for service, and one was Mary Heckert, who was named the gift shop after her, and I have a picture here of Rosemary Donahue, was a fellow teacher, and she and I have been, our names are posted as the Rosemary Donahue and Roy Schilling Gallery, where we have all these galleries. Huh? About 3 years ago, I've been very much involved in Illinois State University. I loved, and so about, I think it's 2004, I believe it was, I was given I was inducted to the Hall of Fame. I'd like to show you.
Illinois State University's Hall of Fame.
Yeah, here it is.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the back of, and then 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I guess it was, I was a homecoming king. And then
I bet that was fun, huh?
that was more fun.
Yeah.
I've been invited to serve in the parade this year as former homecoming king, but I can't because I'm going to be gone on my trip. Then, just last February, unexpectedly, a man called me, Bill Habig called me and said, I have something I want to talk with you about that might interest you. And I thought, well, I knew him to be a great fundraiser, so I thought, well, he's going to ask me for a contribution. But no, he called me and he came to see me and he said, we need to name we need to give an award to someone from the Sertoma Club every year, and you've been selected to be given the Service to Mankind Award. And I said, you've got the wrong man. He said, no, we know who you are. So last February 24th at Central Christian Church, in the presence of 115 people, we had a big dinner, and I was given that award.
Wow.
So
congratulations.
they just keep coming.
Yeah. Any other memories you want to talk about that we haven't covered? Have we covered the waterfront, you think,
well,
on your life, or there are other areas?
I have, last night, a very good friend of mine, who's a widow of my very good friend from childhood, called, and all her memories are sad, 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 sad. My memories are nothing but pleasant. My family, my parents, my wife, my children, my grandson, my son-in-law, my fellow teachers, superintendents of schools. You see, I always said, you do not succeed without the help of a lot of people. So Mr. Lukenbill, our county superintendent of schools, took me up to Emden. Then he had a good friend who was a city superintendent named D.F. Nichols, and I got a job there. And then the first time I ever felt I got a job on my own merit was when I took the job in Oregon. And Dr. Maskey, the president, invited me to become a teacher. In Wisconsin, it was Dr. Newland, and in River Forest was Dr. Burt.
Yep.
And in Decatur, which is probably the highlight of my career, Lester Grant, who was assistant superintendent, and Charlotte Meyer, the assistant in charge of elementary, employed me. And so I have nothing but pleasant memories.
Yeah. Just to kind of wrap this thing up, if you think we've covered everything we need to cover.
It seems like it.
Okay. Any advice?
I just hope and pray that what I've said is not offending anybody, or.
Oh, I don't think so.
I hope not.
I didn't notice
I've
anything.
been so fortunate.
Yes. Any advice you'd like to give your grandchildren or the
Well,
all of us young people?
I told my father said to us four boys, I don't care how smart you are or how much you know, if you don't know how to get along with people, you're not going to make it. He said, you cannot have too many friends, not because they can do something for you, just for fellowship and love. And I've had countless friends, old and young, and that's what I'm passing on to my children. So many of my friends are gone. See, I always felt a friend made once is a friend for life. So I went to college at 1933, and I was assigned to share a room with a young man named Herbert Barons, the son of a Lutheran minister. And we had nothing in common. We got along very well, and we remained closer and closer friendships until he died. He lived in New Jersey, and he would come in his last years of life. He died in about 2001. Mm-hmm. He'd come with his wife every year to see me. And so friendship is very important.
Right. That's great. Well, it's been
So I tell my children, and I think so far they're doing pretty well.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, to Roy, and again, I hope we've covered all the important events of your life, and you're a treasure.
I just can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.